Okay, frontbench speech is Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and I want to begin by echoing the comments of congratulations and thanks to the Honourable Member for Upper Bann for bringing this debate forward, and I'm very pleased to be participating in it. Because it's very important that the challenges facing our farming sector are properly aired, and it is a little bit disappointing that it hasn't attracted more interest from across the House. Farming, which uses more energy, for example in the horticultural and poultry sector, are not included in the UK Government's definition of energy and trade-intensive industries, and therefore will see a reduction in the support provided for farms with energy costs, which has caused understandable and great disquiet. The omission of horticulture is particularly frustrating. The question posed by the National Farmers Union, and the question to which I think we would all like an answer, is why are botanical gardens included in the scheme but not food grown in greenhouses? And that's to take nothing away from botanical gardens, but it does seem quite out of kilter and bewildering. Whilst farmers in Scotland and across the UK see their European counterparts supported with a €500 million support package to help with production costs, our farmers feel that the support they have been asking for has not been forthcoming. It had been very much hoped, as the Minister will be aware, it had been very much hoped that the Chancellor in his budget last week would have extended the definition of energy and trade-intensive industries, and it's extremely frustrating that this has not happened. As production costs soar, many farmers and food producers face a cliff edge of support. Cliff edge, of course, Mr Chair, is an expression that I think every speaker in the debate has used so far. Many of them simply don't know how they'll be able to keep going, and begs the question, where in this government's priorities does domestic food production come? Unless this definition is extended, there may well be a reduction in the production of domestic food, which will risk longer-running food price inflation for consumers and could also negatively impact the thousands of supply chain companies which are sustained by the farming sector. Now, recent weeks have demonstrated how important domestic food production is, but it is energy intensive. And we only have to think back to the recent tomato shortage as a prime example of what can go wrong if the farming sector isn't supported. The vast majority of tomatoes grown in the UK are grown in greenhouses. Clearly, that is energy intensive. That, alongside the soaring cost of fertiliser, has given farmers cause to review what food they can actually afford to grow. Indeed, many farmers have opted not to grow vegetables this winter, since there is a genuine lack of confidence that they would be able to cover the costs associated with energy-intensive crops. Another casualty is expected to be cucumbers, which are also energy-intensive. But more generally, it is now expected that next year there will be a shortage of domestic produce right across the board. Farmers cannot be expected to grow produce where they cannot even cover the costs. The reality is it's simply not viable to grow under glass unless farming is recognised as an energy-intensive business. The only way to ensure that we have fresh produce on our shelves that is domestically produced is for the UK Government to understand what everyone else understands, that food production is energy-intensive. It's bewildering that this argument actually has to be made. If this is not recognised, we can expect supermarket shelves, a shortage of fresh domestic produce to become a familiar sight as international supply chains are disrupted, meaning that we can't even have imported fresh produce either, as we've seen recently with tomatoes. And it won't be because of rain in Spain. It won't be because of Moroccan weather changes, as we were told recently when the tomatoes became like hen's teeth. It will be because of inaction from this government. There can be no doubt also that Brexit has posed huge difficulties and challenges for domestic food production. Now, farmers were promised a Brexit bonanza, but the reality is they have been left paying the price of the damage caused by the Brexit adventure. And of course, Mr Chair, some people might think, well, she would say that, wouldn't she? But the chair of Save British Food has observed, and I quote, "I keep hearing that Spain has been blamed for food shortages in Britain, and this is absolute nonsense. The reason we have food shortages in Britain, and they don't have food shortages in Spain or anywhere else, is the EU, is because of Brexit and because of this disastrous Conservative government that have no interest in food production or farming or even food supply. That's why we're in this mess. The Conservatives, with their Brexit, have messed up our trade and they've made that very difficult. This has also impacted the labour supply as it ended freedom of movement. It's also removed the cap and food subsidies, then added on top of that the Ukraine war and COVID and all the inflation. All of this was predicted and predictable." Mr Chair, that's the end of that quote. These are not my words. These are the words of the chair of Save British Food, who I suspect knows a thing or two about British food. But the chair of Save British Food is now part of what can be described as a growing chorus of people who have concluded that the only way to fix this is, as she says, to get back in the single market and the customs union. But the woes for farmers are not hard to find because they're piling up at an alarming rate. The Public Accounts Committee has criticised the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs for its, and I quote, blind optimism over the implementation of the UK Government's alternative to the EU's Common Agricultural Policy funds, with a lack of detail as to how alternative funding will provide the help needed. But we can barely imagine the sense of betrayal and abandonment farmers feel when they look at their EU counterparts who have a £500 million support package to help with production costs, a lump sum to farmers and agri-food businesses affected by significant increase in input costs such as energy, fertiliser and animal feed. And all the farmers in the UK are asking for is similar support. And energy costs are the obstacle that is really going to hit the level of domestic food production across the UK. And I don't think, Mr Chair, there's any debate about that. And on top of that, of course, they have to deal with chronic labour shortages, with £22 million of fruit rotting in the fields because of that labour shortage, because of the end of freedom of movement. Now, the Scottish Government is doing what it can to support farmers with the limited powers it has. But the Minister doesn't need me to tell him that when it comes to energy support, these are matters reserved to the UK Government. And it's to the UK Government that our farmers are looking, hoping, asking, lobbying for them to take note of the devastating impact that we will see on the farming sector and domestic food production if farming is not recognised as it rightfully should be as an energy-intensive business, and that should be no surprise to anybody. I suppose, Mr Chair, when you get right down to it, what this debate is really about is, does domestic food production matter? And if it doesn't matter, then that's a position that the government can tell us about. But I believe, and many believe, that it does matter. And if it does matter, it requires the support that's been called for today. And it's very important that it does get that support. So I really hope that the Minister will listen and will go back to his colleagues and make the case, make the strong, robust case to include horticulture and poultry in the energy trade intensive industry scheme. Otherwise, the damage to our farming sector and our domestic food production will be nothing short of catastrophic.